Hey there, truth seekers. I'm Larry Litton, your guide through the maze of modern politics and power dynamics on liberty, leadership, and lies. Each episode will challenge the narratives, expose the lies, and celebrate the leaders who champion true liberty. Get ready to question, learn, and maybe even change your mind. So let's dive into the truth together. Greetings from frozen and snowy Wyoming this week, folks. And once again, welcome to the podcast dedicated to unearthing the truths the government too often buries under layers of deception. Today, we are centering our discussion around a powerful theme. Principled leadership doesn't need lies. In a constitutional republic like ours, real leaders confront uncomfortable truths head on, building trust through honesty rather than eroding it with fabrications. This principle is the lens which we'll examine one of Tennessee's most egregious governmental betrayals, and it should serve as a guide when choosing our next governor here in our beloved volunteer state. That government betrayal would be none other than Governor Bill Lee's Education Freedom Scholarship Program, or as we've called it and will continue to call it, the voucher scam. If you've been following Tennessee politics in 2025, you've heard the sales pitch from not only Governor Lee and his henchman, Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally, and Speaker Cameron Sexton, Majority Leader Napoleon Lamberth, and a whole host of establishment Transpublicans. That sales pitch was primarily that this program was touted as a savior for low-income students trapped in failing schools. Schools that are wholly controlled by the state in the first place. And it was supposed to be a boost for educational outcomes through competition, as well as a harmless addition that wouldn't touch public education funding. Lee and his Transpublican goon squad in the General Assembly repeated these claims ad nauseum. Claims, by the way, that were echoed and championed by Senator Marsha Blackburn before and now during her campaign to be our next governor. She will be sort of a Bill Lee 2.0, in my opinion. But by this month, which is December 2025, every pillar of that narrative has collapsed under the weight of facts. Lawsuits, poor data, and undeniable failures showing that the scam is more about privatizing profits than public good. We'll dissect the false promises, the hidden costs, the lawsuits, the political divides between establishment sellouts and principled conservatives, and the dirty tactics that were fueled by out-of-state money. Drawing from sources like Gary Humble's ex-post criticizing Bill Lee's ignorance and establishment deceptions, and Monty Fritz, who outlines his stand against vouchers as unconstitutional overreach, we'll illustrate how true leadership rejects lies for transparency. So let's go deep into this morass of unprincipled leadership, foisting an unconstitutional piece of legislation on the backs of every taxpayer in our state. We'll also highlight some of the supporters of this piece of liberty-eroding garbage by two of the three gubernatorial candidates, which should make it very apparent who you are not going to vote for during the next August GOP primary. So grab your coffee, turn up the volume, and let's get into it. Liberty, leadership, and lies, because the truth will set us free. Welcome to Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, the podcast where we unravel the complex web of politics, power, and deception. Each week, we dive into the stories behind the headlines, exploring how liberty is eroded and the selfishness of our political leaders, as well as the lies that shape our world. Join us as we dissect the truth from fiction by examining the tactics used by the new aristocracy, the political class, at the local, state, and national levels of government as we dare to challenge the status quo. Get ready for thought-provoking discussions, exclusive interviews, and a journey into the heart of what really drives our society. Liberty, leadership, and lies, where your understanding of the world begins to change. Tune in every Monday morning and prepare to see beyond the veil. All right, folks. Let's kick off with the seductive promises that sold this voucher scam to Tennesseans. Keep in mind, folks, that principled leadership doesn't need lies to pass legislation. Principled leadership thrives on revealing hard truths, even if they unsettle the status quo. Now, the biggest lie, and we've covered this many times before on this program, is that government cannot sell you something it was put into place by the people to secure: our liberty, our freedom. So the name of the scam bill forced down our throats was a lie. It was falsely named the Education Freedom Scholarship Act. Truth be told, it should have been called the Bill Lee Legacy Purchasing Act. Again, folks, principled leaders do not need, nor do they use, lies to pass legislation. But Bill Lee and his supporters chose the path of deception, painting a utopia that reality has shattered. The Education Freedom Scholarship Act, signed in February 2025, offered $7,300 scholarships for up to 20,000 students to flee failing public schools for private options or homeschooling. I know that I harp on this point a lot, but the government is already in charge of those failing schools. We must never lose sight of the fact that our state's constitution dictates that the General Assembly shall provide for a system of free public schools. So the failing public schools Bill Lee's scam legislation is paying people to flee are schools already controlled by the government. They are failing because government failed. So what do we get? Something that is typical of both the communists and the establishment Republicans. The solution for government failure is always more and costlier government, which is always funded by the taxes and fees on the citizens. Anyway, Lee claimed his quote-unquote scholarships targeted the needy, with half the spots going to low-income families below 30% of the poverty level. What does that mean exactly? Well, for the 2025-2026 school year, 10,000 of the total 20,000 scholarships were set aside for students from households whose annual income was at or below 300% of the federal free or reduced price lunch guidelines. Now, this threshold is approximately $173,000 for a family of four for that school year. That doesn't seem like a family living in poverty now, does it? A six-figure income qualifies for half the scholarships? It's amazing how they sold that to Tennesseans, right? But the universal half of the scholarships, the other 10,000, well, they have no income limits, which means that the taxpayers of this state are now subsidizing families that already had children enrolled in private schools because they could afford it. Worse, no data collection on prior enrollment means we can't prove it's helping anyone new. It's likely just a giveaway. One of the commies in the General Assembly, Caleb Hemmer, he actually spoke truthfully when he called these things education fraud accounts. Now, Florida's abuses of that state's school choice program, it's ripe with fraud. There are reports of taxpayer-funded Disney tickets, which that should have served as warnings to everyone, not just the conservatives around the state. What about Lee's half of the vouchers would be for low-income families claim? Well, that claim is hollow without data, especially based upon the 300% of the poverty level claims I just described earlier. This isn't equity. It's elite enrichment disguised as help. On the outcomes, proponents cited other states' successes, but Tennessee's pilot program showed voucher kids underperforming in math and reading. And that's per Commissioner Liz Reynolds' 2024 report. And keep in mind that Lizette Reynolds, she's just another Penny Schwinn, folks. Now, Brookings and Vanderbilt studies confirm negative impacts without accountability. Private schools avoid state tests. Standardized testing, well, that's a completely separate topic that we'll get into on a different episode. But all of this was used to justify more government growth, a new entitlement program. But lack of testing can and often does produce failures. What about competition, though? That part they sold us. Eventually, future diverted funds will cripple public schools, not spurn them for more competition or to improve. Right now, government schools have an almost monopolistic control over education. Plus, the bill itself ensured no loss of funding the first year, and there's arguments from Bill Lee that it's continuous, so there's no real competition. You cannot compete with a government program that is compulsory. These lies could have been avoided with truth statements from the new aristocracy. Truth statements such as outcomes may vary and public schools could suffer. That was never said. Or that taxpayers will now be forced to fund both private and public education. They never said that. In fact, they said that was impossible. Those words never escaped the lips of our unprincipled leaders in state government, as well as their big money out-of-state PACs. But principled leadership, they don't need lies. Our republic demands candor to serve all. So, ladies and gentlemen, what if leaders admitted their pet pilot projects failed? That would lead to the government being forced to fix the education system that is wholly within their control. By the way, that's a Trojan horse too, the part of the voucher scam that, and we've touched on it before, with government money comes government strings. Once any private school or homeschooler, one of those education systems accepts the vouchers, they will be subjected to government control in some way, shape, or fashion. Fixing public schools, though, is something most politicians are afraid to tackle. It's the third rail of politics. And that's mainly because they would have to admit that they are mostly failing because of the government. Now, what about the hidden costs, though? Let's move on to the financial shadows. Principled leadership, again, doesn't need lies to fund initiatives. It presents uncomfortable fiscal truths up front in our constitutional republic. Now, Trans-Publican Governor Lee, he promised no public school harm, selling the easily convinced of the scheme's separate funding. But the $144 million initial cost, which is going to be ballooning to $400 million, well, that comes from the general fund, which will eventually end up shortcoming government schools. Vouchers cost more per student than public education. Now, thankfully, a lawsuit that was filed last month claims constitutional violations, denying adequate public education. But the lies and out-of-state money, it prevailed for that special session in January of this year. Principled leaders, they embrace hard realities for fair governance. If you live in Tennessee and you have seen a different reality than the one Bill Lee and his goons promised, let me know. Send an email to me here at the show. The email address is larry@libertyleadershipandlies.com. And now with that, we're going to take a quick break. So stick with me and I'll be right back. Okay, folks, now let's get into some of the players in the voucher scheme, the principled and unprincipled individuals involved, and what that means for us going forward. Principled leadership doesn't need lies to build coalitions. It unites through transparent constitutional truths. As we discussed in the first segment, we discussed some of the lies from unprincipled leaders like Bill Lee, Jack Johnson, Randy McNally, William Lambert, Jeremy Faison, and many others in trying to sell this unconstitutional abomination to the citizens here in the volunteer state. Even going so far as to only use deceptively worded surveys to say a majority of people in Tennessee support quote unquote education freedom, which everybody does, without revealing how that supposed freedom was going to be delivered by costing us. Now, it is being delivered by Tennesseans paying taxes to now fund government and private schools. Establishment politicians, members of the new aristocracy like Marsha Blackburn, praised Lee's leadership on vouchers, stating in pro-choice ads tying her support for this hidden liberty-robbing scam to her now 2026 gubernatorial run. The other establishment politician in the race for the GOP nomination, Congressman John Rose, he also supports expansion aligned with donors and ignoring the flaws, the design flaws in the scheme. That brings me to another point in how unprincipled leaders use falsehoods to put more tax chains on the people. During the expedited committee meetings during the special session that passed this monstrosity, there was a lot of pushback from the establishment hacks on calling these so-called scholarships what they really are, vouchers. They're still trying to bang that drum. Recently, Tennessee State Senator Bo Watson defended the quote-unquote education freedom scholarships and stated that calling them vouchers is political. He stated, quote, "Voucher is a dog whistle. You know it, I know it, and everybody knows it," unquote. Does that tactic sound familiar, ladies and gentlemen? Well, it should. Dog whistle is the term that commies always throw around when describing something President Trump says or when describing words used by conservatives. Same tactic is used now by establishment Republicans. If the truth were to be used, vouchers would describe them quite accurately. And based upon what we are learning about the program currently, they could also be truthfully called private school subsidies. Now, let's break down that line by unprincipled elected officials as it relates to what these actually are. I asked a couple AI programs, to describe the differences between vouchers and scholarships, and this is the answer that I received. Vouchers and scholarships both offer funds for education, but vouchers are typically direct government-funded certificates for public funds to be spent at private schools or for homeschooling therapy via like education savings accounts, whereas scholarships are broader terms, often from private donors or nonprofits, sometimes tax credit funded, awarded for merit or need, and can offer various or cover various costs like tuition, books, etc., with a key distinction being the source of the funds and the flexibility of use. Vouchers reallocate public money. Scholarships are often private, voluntary contributions. So, whenever you confront one of these unprincipled leaders that are trying to lecture us on what words mean, provide them with the truth, the actual definitions. Watch them squirm, watch them deflect, watch them even get angry. One of the things that makes unprincipled leadership upset and uncomfortable is when they are confronted with the truth when they are trying to sell the people a lie. Now let's contrast all of those people with Monty Fritz. Monty is most assuredly a principled conservative and devout Christian that understands biblical and constitutional truth, and he is running for governor of the great state of Tennessee. Monty voted against the school voucher scam, correctly calling it unconstitutional under Article 11, Section 12 of the Tennessee Constitution, which, by the way, is one of the many reasons the lawsuits have been brought against the state and Governor Lee for his attempt to purchase a legacy with the taxpayer sweat equity. Just one of the many reasons Tennesseans should vote for Monty is this: he pledges to suspend it on his first day in office. Besides its unconstitutionality, he also cites its fiscal irresponsibility and government overreach. He correctly criticizes the celebrity establishment and entrenched political class that have done and continue to do severe damage to liberty here in Tennessee. One of the many things he criticizes is the 59% budget growth over the past 6 years. Now, that's a growth rate that even exceeds the central government's budget growth. Astonishing when you realize that that time frame includes the great COVID spending spree that happened in D.C. Oh, wait. Who was in D.C. during those spending sprees? Well, Congressman John Rose and Senator Marsha Blackburn were, of course. Their service in the Congress is not demonstrative of principled leadership as it relates to fiscal conservatism, now does it? Monty also decries the Nashville establishment's embracing of corporate welfare over core services as part of that budget growth. Now, Monty, he seeks to prioritize God's guidance, which is the same guidance our founding fathers relied upon when they designed our system of governance. Monty also wants a return to prioritizing our U.S. and Tennessee constitutions regarding the guardrails those documents put on government action and not citizen restriction, which has become the norm for the better part of a century now. He is also a Second Amendment absolutist, as well as removing government favoritism in education, and protecting the citizens' private property rights by ending tax evictions, as well as removing all incentives for illegal immigrants coming to our country and our state. Finally, folks, I want to remind you that the tactics used by the unprincipled establishment politicians in Nashville. Principled leadership doesn't need lies to navigate crises. Principled leaders that speak truth face crises forthright in our republic, or at least they're supposed to. Never forget that Bill Lee hijacked the January 2025 Hurricane Helene relief session which was supposed to deliver $450 million in aid to counties in East Tennessee devastated by that storm, he hijacked that special session by bundling in his voucher scheme. Despite the outcry about inappropriateness of doing that during the special session, which, again, by the way, this special session could have been convened months earlier, but it was held off to lull opposition, in my opinion. It's right around the holidays. So in essence, Bill Lee exploited the tragedy affecting thousands of the citizens he was elected to serve so that he could get his legacy rammed through while a majority of the population was not paying attention. Out-of-state Coke and Devos groups spent millions of dollars pushing for the vouchers or electing people that would get the scheme over the finish line in the General Assembly. Kelly Jackson, who runs Truthwire News here in Tennessee, she exposes how we get the donor class governors elected via loopholes in our election laws. If you live in Tennessee and are not following her, you need to do so immediately. Truthwire News. She exposes the dirty laundry of the Tennessee political class quite frequently with her well-written and extensively researched articles. One of her latest pieces details the many 2025 betrayals, such as the hidden $8 million open primaries costs, House Bill 855 lied on impact, killing closed primaries, House Bill 886, and digital IDs, House Bill 1316, gutting parental rights and emergency reforms. She informs her audience on how the smears on grassroots conservatives are nothing more than manufactured outrage and details the centrist courtships like Senate Majority Leader Jack Johnson's. Other conservative commentators in Tennessee have also called out the voucher scheme for its ties to Bill Gates and a United Nations agendas. Those same donors and ties are linked to two of the three declared Republican candidates for Tennessee's governor in next year's primary. We cannot be fooled again by the promises and speeches of unprincipled individuals. Principled leadership doesn't lead lies. Truth governs, or should govern, our republic and the individual states that make up our republic. Stick with me through the next break, and I'll come back with my closing thoughts as well as this week's wisdom from God's Word. I'll be right back. All right, folks, that's a wrap for this week. Be sure to listen to next week's episode where I'll be sitting down with Dr. Nelva Lee. Now, today's closing will be a bit longer than usual because this is vital to liberty here in the volunteer state. In today's show, we waded through the muck of the voucher scam, the lies, the hidden costs, the exploitation of tragedy, and the unprincipled power plays that have left Tennessee taxpayers footing the bill for an elite enrichment while our public schools limp along under the weight of government failure. We've exposed how Governor Bill Lee and his trans-Publican cronies, from Randy McNally to Cameron Sexton, peddled deception as freedom, all while bundling it into a hurricane relief session like some sleight-of-hand carnival trick. And we've contrasted that rot with the rare light of true principled leadership, the kind that doesn't need smoke and mirrors because it stands on the bedrock of constitutional truth. As we wrap this up, I want to zoom in on what this all means for August 2026. That's when Tennessee Republicans will head to the polls for our GOP primary for governor. And folks, this isn't just another election, or it shouldn't be. It should be a reckoning. It's a chance to draw a line in the sand between those who spent years eroding our liberty through unchecked government growth and overreach, and the one leader who's proven time and again that he won't bend, won't break, and won't betray. Of course, I'm talking about Monty Fritz here, the principled conservative, the devout Christian, the man who's not afraid to call out the Nashville establishment for what it is, a bloated machine that prioritizes corporate welfare, out-of-state donor cash, and legacy-building scams over the God-given rights of everyday Tennesseans. Let me paint the picture as clear as a Smoky Mountain morning. For years, this establishment, fed by the same special interests that poured millions into shoving vouchers down our throats, has ballooned our state's budget by 59% in just 6 years. That's not fiscal conservatism. That's fiscal recklessness on steroids. outpacing even the wild spending spree in our nation's capital under Joe Biden. And who was right there in the halls of Congress casting votes that fueled that federal flood of debt and overreach? Well, Senator Marsha Blackburn and Congressman John Rose. That's who. Blackburn, with her polished speeches and star power, has been a reliable cheerleader for the status quo, praising Bill Lee's leadership on vouchers in those glossy pro-choice ads, tying her wagon to the very scam that's now drowning in lawsuits for its violating Article 11, Section 12 of our state constitution. She's not just supportive, she's embedded, starring in the establishment's playbook, echoing the same half-truths about no harm to public schools while the general fund bleeds out to subsidize six-figure families and private school subsidies disguised as scholarships. And John Rose, look, he's got that farmer boy next door with an extremely younger wife charm, but dig a little deeper and you'll find the same ties to the donor class that Kelly Jackson at Truthwire has been dismantling brick by brick. Rose backs voucher expansion without batting an eye, ignoring the flaws. Remember, they're design flaws. Ignoring the flaws, the lack of data, the fraud risks straight out of Florida's playbook, the inevitable government strings that turn choice into control. These aren't isolated missteps, friends. This is a pattern. Blackburn and Rose are the Nashville establishment incarnate. Cozy with the Kochs, the DeVoses, even whispers with the United Nations and Bill Gates' shadowy agendas filtering through their donor networks. They voted for corporate welfare that starves core services, turned a blind eye to digital IDs and open primaries that chip away at our electoral sovereignty, and gutted parental rights under the guise of reform. You know, it's a slow boil of liberty erosion. More taxes, more regulation, more government fingerprints on every aspect of our lives, from education to property rights to border security. Now contrast that with Monty Fritz. Monty isn't some career politician chasing a corner office or a donor's pat on the back. He's a man who's lived the Tennessee values he preaches: faith first, family focused, and fiercely committed to the constitutions, both U.S. and Tennessee, that our founders bled for. When the voucher scam hit the floor, Monty didn't waffle or whisper. He voted no, loud and clear, labeling it the unconstitutional overreach it is. On day one as governor, he pledges to suspend it, not because it's politically expedient, but because it's fiscally irresponsible and a direct assault on the free public schools our state charter demands we maintain. No more taxpayer-funded bailouts for government failures. No more exploiting tragedies like Hurricane Helene to ram through pet projects. Monty's leadership is principled because it's transparent. He admits the hard truths, like how that 59% budget explosion has prioritized cronies over citizens. And he offers real solutions rooted in God's guidance and limited government, just as our founding fathers envisioned. Think about it. Monty is a Second Amendment absolutist. No red flag laws, no backdoor registries that the establishment loves to sneak in. He's all in on protecting private property rights, ending those predatory tax evictions that have families losing homes over a few missed payments. And on immigration, no more incentives drawing illegals across our borders. He'll cut the red tape and the handouts that turn Tennessee into a magnet. This isn't rhetoric, it's a record. Monty's called out the celebrity establishment and the entrenched political class for the damage they've done, from killing closed primaries to embracing UN-tied agendas that smell more like globalism than volunteer state grit. He's not bought by out-of-state PACs. He's backed by grassroots Tennesseans who see through the lies because they felt the squeeze. Folks, if you've been listening to this podcast, you know I don't mince words. Principled leadership doesn't need lies. It confronts the uncomfortable truths head on, builds coalitions on candor, and governs with the fear of God, not the favor of donors. Marsha Blackburn and John Rose, they've demonstrated time and again that they're part of the problem. The Nashville machine that has grown government into a leviathan, eroding our liberties one harmless bill at a time, which is probably why both of them have not agreed to debate Monty during the primary season yet. They've got the connections, the cash, and the compromises that keep the cycle spinning. But Monty Fritz, he is the antidote. He is the leader who will hit the brakes on overreach, shrink that bloated budget, and restore Tennessee as a beacon of liberty, not a vassal to the establishment. So here's my call to action to you, Tennessee Patriots. In the lead up to August 2026, get involved. I've got links to his website and social media in the description of this podcast. Donate if you can, volunteer if you're able, and spread the word like wildfire through the hills. Talk to your neighbors, your church groups, your hunting buddies. Remind them of the voucher betrayal, the budget betrayal, the liberty betrayal that's been decades in the making. And when primary day rolls around, cast your vote for the man who has proven he leads with principle, not pandering. You may not think that Monty Fritz isn't perfect. No one's claiming that, but he's consistent. He's truthful. And in a field of establishment echoes, that is rarer than an honest politician in Nashville. So before we sign off, as always, let's ground this week's podcast in some wisdom from God's word. This week, it comes to us from the book of Titus, chapter 1, verses 7 through 9. Since an overseer manages God's household, he must be blameless, not overbearing, not quick-tempered, not given to drunkenness, not violent, not pursuing dishonest gain. Rather, he must be hospitable, one who loves what is good, who is self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firmly to the trustworthy message as it has been taught, so that he can encourage others by sound doctrine and refute those who oppose it. Now, if that bit of scripture does not accurately describe the type of person needed in elected office, I don't know what else does. And all you have to do is look at the actual persons and the records of the three candidates, John Rose, Marsha Blackburn, and Monty Fritz, and know which one of those three fits the bill. May we delight the Lord by choosing leaders who love what is good and is holy and disciplined. And that starts with Monty Fritz. That's it for this week from Frozen Wyoming. But remember, the fight for liberty never sleeps. Email me your thoughts at larry@libertyleadershipandlies.com and tune in next week for our special guest. Thanks for leaning in today. Please subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And join me on X. Handles there are at Larry for TN12 or at Lies Liberty. As always, you can also visit libertyleadershipandlies.com for more. And let's keep standing in the arena for liberty, leadership, and truth. God bless you. God bless Tennessee. And God bless these United States of America. Until next week, reveille. It's time to wake up.